Hey everyone, welcome to this week's reading with myself and pdmac. We're picking up on Empire of Serpents, chapters 3 and 4. So we will just jump right in. Chapter 3, Gwen. I've never seen a dragon before, Kaelin said eagerly. If we don't defeat Torian, you won't see one again, Venya said. Her words sounded like a reprimand, but Callan didn't seem bothered. Do we need to get supplies before we leave? Gwen asked. Food and water? No need until we reach Olivelle, Vinya answered. We'll make several stops along the way, and I'll make sure it's near civilized places so you two can get what you need. I'll fly high enough that no one on the ground should see us, but that requires a lot of energy and strength, which in turn requires a lot of food. They walked along the main street, headed toward the gates where Gwen had entered. The rebellion spy was at his vendor stall, calling out to passerby and holding his dresses out for visibility. Gwen locked eyes with him as they passed, and he offered a nod. When he'd cornered her and pressed a dagger to her back, her first instinct had been to kill with fire. As she considered that, it disturbed her. That wasn't her. She'd never wished harm on anyone except Torian and his lackeys. And yet, she had almost taken the man's life without a second thought. Was she being swayed by the dark magic that coursed through her? Or had she changed more than she realized, becoming more like Emil? She hoped that was not the case. Then you led them out of the city and along a road that went northeast until they were far enough away that it was unlikely anyone in the city would see them. Stand back, she warned. Gwen and Kaelin backpedaled until they were several feet away. Then you closed her eyes, and for a moment, nothing happened. Gwen held her breath and watched intently. The change began slowly. Vinya's skin lightened until it took on a sickly pale color. She dropped to the ground on all fours, her body racked with spasms so strong that her arms and legs trembled visibly. Vinya hacked loudly. Her shoulder blades protruded from her back, and Gwen flinched at how odd it looked. A loud popping noise filled the air, then her shoulder blades elongated and morphed into wings. Her body lengthened and grew in size until she was easily 20 feet long. Her face extended into a long snout, and her skin color changed again, from pale white to silver, and scales took shape along her form. When it was over, Venya was breathing heavily. Does it hurt? Gwen asked. When you change, I mean? Yes, Venya replied, but the more I shift, the less I feel it. The first time I changed, I thought I was going to die. Absolutely fascinating, Kaelin whispered. A real dragon, in the flesh. Come, Venya said. Climb onto my back. Gwen had ridden on her once before, so she had little trouble getting onto Venya's back and settling herself into place. Kaelin followed the same path up Venya's shoulders and stood over Gwen. Move back, he said. Why? So I can sit in the front. Gwen snorted. No, you can sit behind me. There's plenty of room. She patted Venya's scales. I want the front. Gwen stared at him and was tempted to pull rank since she was technically the queen, but instead she shrugged and scooted back, giving him enough room to sit down. Once he was settled, she nudged up behind him. You'll want to get a good grip, Gwen said, or when she climbs into the air, you'll fall off. Kaelin felt along Venya's neck scales until he found spots that he could grab, then he clenched his hands tightly onto them. Gwen didn't have anything to hold except Kaelin. She hesitantly wrapped her arms around his chest and hugged him close. He smelled of lilac, a heady sweet scent with a touch of vanilla. She thought it odd he smelled so good. It made clinging to him less disagreeable. Venya dug her claws into the ground and crouched low, poised much like a cat about to pounce. Unlike a cat, however, she sprang into the air and flapped her powerful wings. The air rushed around Gwen like the sound of a raging river. She watched the landscape quickly fade below them. Her stomach churned and her eyes teared from the whipping wind, but she exulted in it all. It wasn't every day she experienced something as miraculous as flying on the back of a dragon. They flew for a long while, and Gwen kept herself occupied by watching the countryside gradually change. The tracts of land were various colors and sizes, and all of them looked small enough that when Gwen held her fingers out, she imagined that she could pinch them. We're heading down, Venya roared. Even though her voice carried, it was still hard for Gwen to hear her clearly over the wind. She leaned forward against Kaelin. Venya began her descent, and Gwen's stomach lurched again. She doubted she could ever get used to the feeling. They flew low over a wooded area, and Venya landed softly in a clearing. I must feast, the dragon announced. There is a town within walking distance if you are hungry. I don't think anyone spotted me, but we should be quick regardless. Venya lowered herself to the ground, and Gwen and Kaelin slid off her shoulders. Gwen felt odd walking on her own legs again, but the feeling was brief. I'm famished, Kalen said. You coming? The sight of a dragon eating a deer or some other such animal wasn't an image Gwen wanted in her head. She nodded, and they left Venya alone to hunt. The two exited the woods and walked through a wheat field until they reached the road that led to the town. As they drew closer to the boundary of the town, an older man was cutting the wheat down with a scythe, while three younger men, whom Gwen assumed were his sons, collected the stalks and tied them into sheaves. Sweat glistened on their tan skin, and one of the sons paused to offer an admiring stare at Gwen. She waved politely and hoped he wouldn't try to speak to her. He went back to work when one of the others shouted at him for taking a break. Kalen and Gwen entered the town and found a single tavern. It was a small wooden building with a thatched roof. Scrawled beside the door in red paint was the word Foamies. A hot meal is calling my name, Kalen said, and a cold ale. Ale sounds good, Gwen agreed. The two went inside and were greeted with curious stares by the handful of patrons that were scattered across the room. One table, in particular, caught Gwen's attention. 4 men in armor, wearing Torian's crest, were laughing and clinking their tankards together. Gwen's heart skipped a beat, but when the men didn't even look their way, her nerves calmed. They don't know who I am, she told herself. Kalen took a seat at a random table, and Gwen followed him. Despite the presence of Torian's soldiers, the atmosphere of Foamies was high-spirited. As Gwen listened to the scattered conversations, she assumed the people were all locals, except for the soldiers. They were minding their own business, and the patrons seemed content to ignore their company. A serving girl sauntered over, her skirt short enough that if she bent down, everything would be revealed. Her top was a loose-fitting piece of white material that barely clung to her ample bosom. Kalen eyed her lustfully, and Gwen rolled her eyes at him. Typical male, she muttered. I'm Poppy, the serving girl said. What's your fancy? A night with you, Poppy, Kalen said with a not-so-innocent grin. Is that so? Poppy placed her hands under the table and leaned forward. Gwen watched Kalen's eyes lower to her cleavage. Yes, indeed. Stick around long enough and you might just earn it, Poppy said, straightening. For now, how does soup sound? That sounds perfect. I want ale, too. I'll also take an ale, Gwen said, and some bread if you have any that's fresh. Coming right up, Poppy said. She strolled away to the kitchen, and Gwen waited for Kalen to turn his attention back to her. You think we can spend the night, he asked. I hope you're kidding, Gwen replied. We don't have time for that. Try and keep your mind on what's important, will you? You're no fun, Kalen complained, unless you're up for some strenuous activities. Have you ever been struck by lightning? No, Kalen said confusedly. Talk to me like that again and you will be. Kalen kept his wolfish grin, but Gwen could see the disappointment in his eyes. He shrugged and looked around the room, then set his gaze on the table of soldiers. What do you think they're doing here? He asked. Nothing good, I'm sure. Poppy returned, skillfully holding a bowl of steaming soup in her left hand and 2 large tankards and a plate of bread with the other. She set them down on the table and accidentally dropped a cloth napkin on the floor. Poppy knelt in front of Kalen seductively and peered up at him with a pouty face. Woman, Kalen hissed through his teeth. I'm about to. Whatever he said was lost to Gwen's ears as the table of soldiers erupted into raucous laughter, and one of them knocked over their tankard, spilling ale onto the table. A stream of golden liquid ran off the edge, splattering onto the floor. Poppy, the drunk soldier shouted. I need your hands. That's not all you need, another soldier said lewdly. Poppy rose to her feet and set the napkin in Kalen's lap, pausing with her hand on him for a moment before metering over to the soldiers. She worked just as seductively with them, crawling on all fours to clean the ale off the floor. Kalen watched jealously. You know it's all for show, Gwen said. What? Kalen looked at her, his face flushed. The way she's flirting, it's all an act. You do know that. Of course I do, Kalen replied, but Gwen knew he was lying. He ate his meal in silence, and he continuously looked around for Poppy. Gwen sipped her ale, enjoying the familiar atmosphere while holding back the dreaded memory of the night at the 7 Stars where everything had begun. Kalen finished his meal and downed what remained of in his tankard, then walked over to a table of farmers. Gwen watched him curiously but couldn't hear what he was saying. A few of them nodded and looked at Gwen, raising their drinks in salute. Gwen's curiosity turned into suspicion. Was Kalen spreading rumors about her? He left that table and went to another. Again, the people he spoke with looked at her and offered nods or raised their drinks. Kalen made his way to every table until only the soldiers remained. As he walked past Poppy, he grabbed a handful of her buttocks and winked at her. He reached the soldiers and leaned down, speaking to the one who'd spilled his drink earlier. The soldiers laughed at first, and Gwen assumed he must have told them a joke. As Kaelin continued talking to them, she noticed that their expressions were changing from amusement to glares of anger. Gwen rose from her chair and started walking toward them, intent on grabbing Kaelin and heading back to Venya. One of the soldiers said something, his tone getting louder as he spoke, but all Gwen heard was the word treason. What are you doing? Gwen demanded, grabbing Kaelin by the arm. And here she is, Kaelin said grandly, the rightful queen of Eisental's throne. The soldiers all stood up at once, and Gwen's heart sunk into her stomach. Kaelin had betrayed her, just like Emil had. That's enough of your nonsense, the soldier across the table growled. He drew his sword and pointed it toward Kaelin. Kaelin looked at Gwen, a brazen look etched on his face. He pulled his arm free of her grasp, grabbed the edge of the table, and flung it into the soldier with the drawn sword. And then all hell broke loose.
Chapter 4. Connell. There was little grumbling during the night as the combined forces of Connell's army moved silently north, hoping to blunt Torian's incursion in time to save what remained of Sorce's regiment. He was surprised at the determination and speed of the dwarven soldiers, keeping pace with the taller human soldiers of Lorcan's army. In the early hours just before dawn, the forward scouts sent back word that they made contact with Sorce's rear elements and that Torian's forces had paused their pursuit to lay waste to the city of Blazington, allowing her to regroup and break contact with the enemy. Less than an hour later, Sorcia strode up to Connell. Her small army, carrying their wounded, flopped down on the side of the road, receiving a welcome rest. Sorcia was a handsome, tall blonde with the strong and fit body of an athlete. She began to drop to her knee when Connell stopped her. Are you okay? Yes, my lord, she answered, completing the obeisance. Don't do that, Connell moaned, bending down to grab her arm and pull him up. We can all be socially proper some other time, but not here or now. We have more important things to worry about. What's your status? Sorcia brushed the grime from her cheeks, impressed that this prince, who seemed unaffected by his position. We managed to delay them, but we couldn't do anything to stop them. We were able to break contact when they decided plundering Blazington was more important than pursuing us. How many? Lorcan walked up, nodding respectfully to Connell. My lord, before addressing Sorcia. I count 17 walking wounded, 6 more gravely injured. I have physicians attending them. Thank you, my friend, she said, breathing a sigh of relief. Connell turned to Torgrith. Tell Story I need him now. Right you are, he grinned and sped off. How many able-bodied do you have? Connell asked Sorcia. I started with 757. I'm down to 702, with 32 dead and left behind. We're facing an army of 3 times my size. I managed to inflict twice my losses on them, but we were in no position to offer combat. I managed to draw them south, hoping Lorcan would have sufficient forces to counterattack. Kilmarin chose to retain his forces to block any southern probes, Lorcan explained. Though I didn't like it, for it reduces our western attack into Eisenthal, it makes sense. I pray that he has the good sense to join the battle when it all begins. That said, we number over 7,000. Sorcia flashed a fierce grin. More than twice the enemy. It's time for payback. Do you know who commands Torian's forces? Connell asked. No, my lord. Never got close enough to find out. Though I did receive reports of a man of great size who appeared to be commanding. Though interesting, it doesn't tell me enough to know who he is. Do you still have scouts out? Yes, my lord. But like all my soldiers, they need rest. I've already sent out some scouts to relieve yours, Lorcan said. I want to know where they are before we attack, Connell said, stating the obvious. Hands jammed on his hips, he scowled and glanced around. Where's Drustin? No one has seen him, my lord, Lorcan answered. One of Lorcan's captains strode up with another man who was still catching his breath. My lord, this man has information about the enemy. At that moment, Story walked up. Good, glad you're here. The scout just arrived. Connell nodded to the scout. Go ahead. The man inhaled a deep breath. Lord, the enemy remains in Blazington, continuing to pillage the city. Yes, Connell exclaimed with a fist pump. How long will it take to get to the city? It took me an hour to get here, my lord, but I pretty much ran the entire time. Connell dropped to his knees in the middle of the road. Smoothing out a spot with his hand, he motioned for the others to kneel down with him. Drawing a small square in the dirt, he explained, "Here's Blazington. Where are the city gates?" "Here and here." Sorcia pointed to a front and rear gate. "Have you been in the city?" "No, my lord. We used it as blocking to help us get away." No matter. We approached from the south." He drew a line as he talked. "If we assume he's a good commander, he will have patrols even while the city is being ravaged. We need to eliminate any security he has so we can penetrate the city. We do this by dividing our forces to block both gates, dwarves to the main gate, the rest to the back gate. We need to get someone inside the city." He looked up at them. "We find someone who can handle himself and put him in the uniform of the enemy." "We'll probably need more than one, my lord," Story said. "Please, that his army had the main attack through the main gate." "I agree, General, but it'll have to be someone other than a dwarf for obvious reasons." "I know," Story nodded. "We assume that his army is expending their strength in drinking and chasing women, or men," Sorcia pointed out, self-consciously adding, "We like a good time too." "Point taken," Connell smiled. "The point is that we want them to be wasted by the time we attack." "If he's a good commander, he won't allow that," Lorcan countered. "You're right," Connell replied, "but he did stop to allow his soldiers to pillage. That caused him to lose contact with his opponent. Not very smart. The spies we send in will alert us to the right time. When they give the signal, we attack from both sides." "Challenge and password?" Sorcia asked. Connell thought only for a moment. "Challenge is dragon, and the password is blood. Make sure everyone knows it. Dwarves will be easy to recognize as friends. Let's not make any mistakes with the rest of us." "Questions?" "Assembly after the attack?" Lorcan asked. "Operation security?" Story added. "Good points," Connell said, standing. "We need 360 security. I leave it to you two to coordinate. Suggestions for the assembly area?" "North of the city," Story suggested. "Sounds good. Let's get ready to move out. We need volunteers for spy duty." "What about me, my lord?" Sorcia said. You are in reserve." Seeing her disappointment, he said, "Don't worry, you'll get your turn. Your soldiers are tired and need rest." He looked up at the sky that was beginning to lighten. "We got to go." Turning to the others, he said, "Oh, one more thing. I'm going with the spies into Blazington." "What?" Lorcan exploded. "Are you crazy?" "That's, are you crazy, my lord?" Connell said with a half smile. But, Lorcan stammered, "this is madness. You're the overall commander, the king's son. How can we protect you if you go in there?" "I have stealth skills beyond what anyone else has," he replied. "It's not a question of skills, my lord," Story said, his tone the voice of reason. "We all have no doubt you can handle yourself. Yet all it takes is one misplaced word, one look of doubt, one misdirected arrow. We can't afford anything happen to you. We destroy the rebellion. Surely you can see that." Connell pursed his lips and looked at Voldar. "Well, really?" Voldar cocked an eyebrow. You're going to possibly take the wind out of this rebellion because you want to show how stealthy you can be? Do you even have to ask?" He slowly twisted his head to look at Sorcia, who said nothing, merely shaking her head no. "Fine, you win. I'll be good. But when it comes time to fight, I want a piece of this action." "If that becomes necessary, my lord," Lorcan corrected him. Connell let out an exasperated breath. "Fine." It was mid-morning by the time they were in position. Lorcan's army had to work its way around the city through the forest. They dispatched several enemy patrols before they had time to warn of Lorcan's army. There had been no shortage of volunteers to sneak into the city. Connell settled on 10, who donned uniforms from the dead enemy patrols. And there had been plenty of intel provided by the fleeing citizens. Tales of rape and murder were the common themes. Blazington itself wasn't a large city, perhaps some 3,000 to 4,000 residents. Open fields about 2 furlongs wide separated the city walls from the surrounding forest. But Blazington was a fortified city with tall stone walls of gray granite and wide stout oak city gates, which were wide open. Dead bodies, some decapitated, others with deep gashes sliced through various parts of their bodies, lay scattered in bloody lumps around the gate and archway across the moat. Several bodies lay where they fell, blocking the doors from being closed. Wisps of smoke near the center of the city curled and dissipated in the morning wind. It was eerily quiet, and Connell impatiently waited for his spies to give the signal, wondering if they had been spotted. Suddenly, a man emerged from the rear gates and ran towards them. Lorcan recognized him as he did Connell. "My lord," he called out, it's unreal. They're dead, almost all of them." "What?" Connell was startled. How was it possible 10 of his spies to accomplish such results in so short a time? "We think it's the ale," the spy said, stopping in front of Connell Lorcan. "We think it's been poisoned. There's still a few alive who are holding out in the center of the city, but for the most part, everyone else is dead. So is their commander." "Show me," Connell ordered, and started back with a spy. Lorcan quickly issued orders telling everyone not to drink anything in the city, as he randomly picked a bodyguard of 20 soldiers to protect Connell. "Do the dwarves know yet?" "Yes, Commander. Hewlin went to tell them." Connell's bodyguard preceded him through the city gates, stepping over bodies and fanning out and keeping watch. Connell's mouth gaped open as he saw the multitude of soldiers curled up in the streets, their eyes glazed over in death. He closed his mouth and scrunched his nose at the stench of puke and feces. Stepping over body after body, Connell gaped as he saw their struggle. Some left claw marks on wooden posts or scrapes along the flaking stone walls. "The last of them are this way, my lord," the spy said, directing them around a corner. To their surprise, a crone of a woman stood in the middle of the street. She was shorter than Corla, due more to her bent of age than actual height. She wore the black of a widow, her silver hair tucked neatly underneath a black scarf. "You're too late," she cackled, her teeth root stained. "Did what I had to. Could have used your help yesterday, but now you shows up, and late's better than ever." The bodyguard reacted, began to surround her, weapons ready. "Leave her alone," Connell commanded, and the bodyguards drew back, though still wary. Connell walked up and smiled at her. "Who are you, mother?" The woman's head snapped up to stare intently at him. "I know you." She glanced surreptitiously around and lowered her voice. "You're the Cobra of Prophecy. Looks like things are going to heat right up soon." Connell looked back over his shoulder at one of the bodyguards. "Fetch Corla." Turning back to the old woman, he smiled kindly at her, waving a hand at the dead soldiers. "So, you did all this?" "Yep." She tapped her nose and winked at him. "Knew they'd start drinking when they got here. Stupid soldiers, got no discipline. Put poison in the ale. Not all of it, mind you. Just the ones I knew they'd start with. Give me time to do the rest. Slow acting. Usually takes an hour or two. By then," she sliced a thumb across her throat. "You saved us a lot of trouble, mother," Connell complimented. "Name's Madeline," she grinned, a root-stained smile at him. "Madeline," Connell repeated. "How do you know who I am?" "Oh," she nodded. "I can tell because you got a glow about you, like the one a dragon has." Connell frowned. "Dragons have a glow about them?" "Of course, dearie," she maternally replied. "Every living creature has a glow, a color. Some calls it aspect. Only a few can see it, though," she chuckled. "Some spends their lives trying to discover it. It is what it is. You can't change it." Corla walked up, giving the woman a polite smile. "You wanted to see me, my lord?" "My lord, is it?" Madeline snickered, then awkwardly bowed. "Forgot my place." Ignoring the jab, Connell spoke to Corla. "This is Madeline. She's responsible for this resounding victory." Lorcan strode up with Store and Gallagher in tow. "There's no one left, my lord." He shook his head in amazement. "We have a chronicler with us?" Connell asked. "Yes, my lord." "Send someone to fetch him. I want Madeline here to be forever remembered as the champion of Blazington, for it is she who defeated our enemy. I want to make sure it is recorded correctly." Surprised and flattered, Madeline blinked in the sudden attention. "We'll need to toss all the ale." "Don't need to," Madeline interrupted. "Poison had already gone out of it. It don't last long, just long enough to do what I needed." Connell nodded understanding, then noticed Corla standing to the side, waiting for instructions. "Madeline, this is Corla. She's a I know what she is, Madeline replied. I could tell it the moment she walked up. Because of her association with you, Madeline interrupted. Figured you'd have a mage with you. Nobody said I was a mage, Corliss said, her brows furrowed. Madeline grinned at her. Takes one to know one. What? You're a mage? Carla cocked an eyebrow in disbelief. Madeline's smile vanished, followed by an intense frown at Corla. Of course I am. She flipped a hand to the surrounding dead. How'd you think I did this? Simple herbalist could have done the same thing, Corla argued. Bah. Madeline turned to Connell. She may be a looker, but she ain't got brains to go with it. If you're finished with me, my lord, I'll go tell the rest of them that's escaped that it's safe to come back now. Will you come with us? Connell blurted. Pardon? I'm asking you to come with us, Connell said. Madeline was again flattered. Why? I'm just an old woman. You're a mage, Connell corrected, and we can use your help. Her? Corliss said, curling a lip. She's no more a mage than I am a warrior. Ignoring her, Connell repeated, will you come with us? She's an old woman. She'll only slow us down, Corla argued. Kind of held up a hand for her to be quiet, though his attention was on the old woman. Well, will you come with us? Madeline looked at them, then at the indignant Corla before grinning. I'd love to, my lord.
Girl drama. All right, that's it for this week. So make sure you hit the subscribe button if you're not subscribed, and keep an eye out. Every Tuesday the videos go up, so keep your eyes peeled for the next one, and we will see you next time.